When the staff disrespected him, they had no idea who they were really dealing with. It was a brisk Thursday afternoon in Memphis, Tennessee, and Jared Cole, a self-made multimillionaire and CEO of a nationwide restaurant chain called Southern Table, found himself in an unusual situation. For years, Jared had worked tirelessly to build his business, starting with one small soul food restaurant in his old neighborhood. His mission was simple: provide authentic, comforting meals and create opportunities for people in communities often overlooked. But as his success grew, so did his distance from the day-to-day experiences of his customers and employees. Jared wasn't the type to sit comfortably in his corner office, basking in the glow of his achievements. He'd always believed that leadership meant staying connected to the people who made his vision possible: the customers, the cooks, the servers, and even the dishwashers lately. However, stories of inconsistent customer service had begun to trickle back to him, and they didn't sit well. Maybe I've lost touch, Jared thought, as he leaned back in his chair during a rare free afternoon. He'd heard complaints about slow service, inattentive staff, and even allegations of rude behavior in some locations. Jared wanted to believe these were isolated incidents, but deep down he knew there was only one way to find out the truth. He had to see it for himself. No press release. No warning, just him walking into one of his restaurants like any other customer. By late afternoon, Jared swapped his tailored suit for a faded hoodie and a pair of jeans he hadn't worn in years. He left his sleek black SUV parked several blocks away to avoid drawing attention and strolled toward one of his Memphis locations. It was a spot he'd opened 5 years ago, right in the heart of a neighborhood he knew well back then. It had been a beacon of hope for the community, a place where people could gather for good food and better conversations. As he approached the restaurant, a wave of nostalgia hit him. The vibrant mural painted on the side of the building depicting smiling faces around a dinner table still looked as fresh as it had on opening day. He smiled faintly, remembering how proud he'd been when the ribbon was cut. But today wasn't about reminiscing. Today was about reality. The parking lot was nearly full, a promising sign of a busy lunch rush. Jared slipped in through the front door, the aroma of fried chicken and collard greens wrapping around him like an old friend. He looked around, scanning the dining area. The staff and the customers' families, couples and solo diners filled the tables, creating a lively hum of conversation. Everything seemed normal. Yet Jared knew better than to judge a book by its cover. He approached the hostess stand where a young woman was leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up. Jared cleared his throat softly. Nothing. He waited a beat, then tried again. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. The hostess glanced up briefly, her expression indifferent. "Yeah, I'd like a table for one," he replied, offering a polite smile without a word. She grabbed a menu from the stand, her eyes already back on her phone as she gestured vaguely toward the dining area. "Sit wherever you want," she muttered. Jared's smile faltered. It wasn't exactly the warm welcome he'd hoped for, but he let it slide. Maybe she was having a rough day. He grabbed the menu and made his way to a small table near the window, feeling a twinge of unease settle in his chest. But as he sat down and waited, Jared began to notice things that made that twinge grow stronger. Jared settled into the small table by the window, taking a moment to scan the room. The restaurant was buzzing with activity, the kind of midday energy he remembered from the early days when he'd worked the floor himself. Servers darted between tables, balancing trays. Customers laughed over plates of catfish and cornbread, and the kitchen doors swung open every few seconds, releasing bursts of steam and the sizzling aroma of fried okra. But something felt off. Jared noticed the tables around him were getting plenty of attention. A server with a bright smile approached a family of 4, chatting warmly as she refilled their drinks and took their dessert order. Another server leaned down at a nearby table to recommend the day's special, yet here he was sitting alone for nearly 10 minutes with no acknowledgement. He decided to give it a little more time. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe they were short-staffed. Maybe his table had been overlooked in the rush. But as minutes ticked by, his patience began to wear thin. He watched his servers pass his table without so much as a glance, their arms full of dishes, headed for customers who had arrived well after him. Jared shifted in his seat, glancing at the menu in his hands. It was the same menu he designed himself, full of dishes that told the story of his roots, recipes passed down from his grandmother, flavors that had kept people coming back for years. It felt strange sitting here in one of his own restaurants, unable to get the most basic level of service. When a server finally approached, Jared felt a flicker of hope. The young man, his name tag read Tyler, stopped at the table next to his to take their order. Jared sat up a little straighter, hoping Tyler might acknowledge him next. But instead, Tyler walked off as soon as he finished with the other table, not sparing a second glance in Jared's direction. Jared raised his hand slightly, trying to catch Tyler's eye. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite but firm. Tyler stopped, turning his head just enough to look over his shoulder. "Yeah," he said, his voice flat. "Could I get some water to start?" Jared asked, keeping his composure. Tyler nodded curtly. "Sure," he said, then disappeared into the kitchen without another word. Jared waited and waited. No water, no follow-up, just more time to sit and watch as the other diners were served with enthusiasm and care. The longer Jared sat there, the harder it became to ignore the contrast. Families and couples were being greeted warmly, their needs attended to with smiles and friendly conversation. But for him, barely a glance, he thought about the customers who'd called in to complain about service in the past. How many of them had been treated like this? How many had walked out, deciding never to return, without him ever knowing why? Still, Jared wasn't ready to jump to conclusions. He wanted to believe there was a reason for what he was experiencing, a reasonable explanation. But as another 15 minutes passed and his table remained empty, that hope began to fade. But just when Jared thought things couldn't get any more disappointing, the next interaction left him questioning everything he'd built. Jared shifted in his seat, his patience wearing thinner with every passing second. The vibrant chatter around him was almost mocking, now a reminder of how far removed he felt from the experience he'd worked so hard to create. He glanced at his phone. Nearly 30 minutes had passed since he sat down, and the water he'd requested from Tyler was still nowhere to be seen. At this point, it wasn't just disappointing, it was personal. Jared didn't consider himself someone who demanded special treatment, but he also didn't expect to be treated as if he were invisible. He took a deep breath, trying to remind himself why he was here. This wasn't about him. This was about ensuring every customer, no matter their appearance, was treated with dignity and respect. Across the room, he spotted Tyler leaning against the counter near the kitchen. The young man was scrolling on his phone, completely oblivious to Jared's tea table. Jared raised his hand again, more assertively this time. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice cutting through the D of the dining room. Tyler glanced up, his expression one of mild annoyance. Slowly, he strolled over to Jared's table. "Yeah," he asked, his tone making it clear he'd rather be anywhere else. Jared kept his composure, though irritation was bubbling just beneath the surface. "I've been waiting a while. Can I place my order now?" Tyler shrugged, pulling a notepad from his apron pocket with deliberate slowness. "What do you want?" Jared blinked, momentarily taken aback by the lack of professionalism. He opened the menu and ordered something simple. The signature fried chicken platter with a side of mac and cheese and collard greens. It was one of the most popular items on the menu, a dish that had been a cornerstone of his brand. "Got it," Tyler muttered, jotting down the order with barely a glance. Without another word, he walked off, leaving Jared sitting there stunned. The minutes dragged on, and Jared found himself sinking deeper into reflection. He thought about his early days in the business, how he'd personally trained staff to treat every customer like family. Hospitality, he'd always said, wasn't just about serving food. It was about creating an experience that made people feel valued. Yet here he was, sit in the very restaurant he'd built from the ground up, feeling like an afterthought. When Tyler finally returned, it wasn't with Jared's food, but with the bill for the table next to his. He handed it to the other customers with a cheerful "Thanks so much for dining with us," before walking right past Jared, without even a glance. It was as if Jared didn't exist. The final straw came when Jared overheard a snippet of conversation between Tyler and another server near the kitchen. "Man, that guy over by the window looks like he's just here to take up space," Tyler said with a smirk. "Probably not even G to tip." Jared's chest tightened. He set his menu down and stared out the window, trying to process what he just heard. It wasn't just neglect, now it was outright disrespect. And for what? Because he didn't look like someone who belonged here, because he wasn't wearing a suit or flashing signs of wealth. It was a punch to the gut. He'd built Southern Table on the foundation of inclusivity, of breaking down barriers and creating opportunities, but now he couldn't help but wonder, had that mission gotten lost somewhere along the way? But as much as the experience hurt, Jared knew he had to handle the situation carefully. The way he responded now could either reinforce the problem or spark change he knew was desperately needed. Jared sat at the table, his mind racing. He was torn between two instincts: his natural inclination to keep his cover and observe, and the growing urge to confront the staff head on. The part of him that had spent years mentoring and uplifting people reminded him that this wasn't just about his experience. It was about something bigger, a deeper culture issue that needed addressing. Finally, Tyler returned. Balancing a tray with Jared's food, he set the plate down without a word, and before Jared could thank him, Tyler was already walking away. Jared glanced at the food. It looked hastily prepared, the presentation sloppy, the mac and cheese was lukewarm, and the fried chicken, his restaurant signature dish, was overcooked to the point of being unappetizing. It was the kind of plate that would have made Jared pull a chef aside in the past to stress the importance of consistency and care. Jared leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Enough was enough. He placed his napkin on the table and stood up, walking calmly toward the hostess stand. The young woman who had dismissed him earlier was still there, phone in hand. She barely looked up as he approached. "Excuse me," Jared said, his voice calm but firm. "Could I speak to the manager, please?" The hostess frowned, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Hune's busy," she replied, flatly, still scrolling. "What's the problem?" Jared maintained his composure, though his patience was wearing thin. "I'd prefer to speak with him directly." With an exaggerated sigh, the hostess finally called out to the back. A few moments later, a man in his late 40s emerged from the kitchen. He was wearing a wrinkled dress shirt, and his expression suggested he wasn't thrilled about being pulled away. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone brisk. Jared introduced himself politely. "Hi, I'm Jared Cole." He said, "I'd like to have a quick word with you." The manager glanced at Jared, his eyes narrowing slightly. There was a flicker of recognition in his expression, but he clearly hadn't pieced it together yet. "All right," he said, crossing his arms. "What's the issue?" Jared motioned toward his table. "I've been here for over 40 minutes, and the service I've received has been frankly unacceptable. I was ignored by your hostess when I arrived, overlooked by your server, and when I finally did get my food, it was subpar at best." The manager glanced toward the dining room, his brow furrowing. "Look, it's busy," he said defensively. "Sometimes things slip through the cracks." Jared tilted his head slightly, his tone steady but pointed. "I understand what a busy day looks like. I've been in this business long enough to know what good service looks like too." The manager stiffened, and Jared could see the realization dawning on him. His eyes widened slightly as he took a closer look. "Wait," he said slowly, you're Jared Cole." "The Jared Cole," Jared nodded. "That's right, and this restaurant, I built it. This isn't just another location in a chain, it's part of my legacy. A legacy I've worked hard to create, not just for me, but for everyone who walks through those doors." The manager's face turned pale as the weight of Jared's words sank in. He glanced toward the hostess, and then toward Tyler, who had just emerged from the kitchen, still oblivious to what was happening. Jared continued, his voice calm, but firm. "I didn't come here to be treated differently because of who I am. I came here to experience every customer experiences. And if this is what they're experiencing, then we have a serious problem." The dining room began to quiet as a few customers noticed the exchange. Tyler froze in place, his face turning red as he realized Jared was addressing the manager about him. Jared turned to him directly, his gaze steady. "Tyler, when I asked for water earlier, you dismissed me when I placed my order. You didn't treat me with the respect every customer deserves. And to top it off, I overheard your comment about me. Do you think that's acceptable behavior?" Tyler stammered, his confidence evaporating. I didn't mean anything by it," he mumbled. "I was just joking." Jared nodded slowly. Jokes like that cost businesses customers, Tyler. And in this case, they're costing you the trust of someone who believed in this team enough to build this restaurant. The room was silent now, all eyes on Jared. He turned back to the manager. This isn't about blaming one person. It's about accountability and leadership. If this is the standard of service you're allowing, then it starts with you. But as tense as the moment was, Jared knew this confrontation wasn't just about pointing fingers. It was an opportunity to turn things around. The silence in the restaurant was deafening, every eye on Jared as his words hung in the air. The manager stood frozen, the weight of responsibility sinking into his shoulders. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, his bravado replaced with a clear sense of embarrassment. The hostess, too, had finally put her phone down, her expression one of quiet regret. Jared took a moment to compose himself, letting the tension settle before speaking again. "I didn't come here today to shame anyone," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I came here to understand this restaurant is more than just a business. To me, it's a symbol of what's possible when people believe in each other. But what I've seen today, it's not who we are, and it's not who we were going to be." He turned to the manager, meeting his eyes directly. "Leadership isn't just about keeping the lights on. It's about setting the tone, holding people accountable, and creating an environment where customers and staff feel valued. That's not what's happening here. So my question to you is this: what are you going to do about it?" The manager's face reddened as he swallowed hard. "You're right," he said quietly. "I let things slide, and that's on me. I'll do better. We'll do better." Jared nodded, his expression softening slightly. "That's the first step, acknowledging the problem. But words only go so far. It's actions that make the difference." He glanced at Tyler and the hostess, then back at the manager. "You got a team that clearly needs training and guidance. I suggest you start there." Jared looked out at the dining room, now filled with curious diners who had been quietly observing the exchange. "To everyone here, I want to say I'm sorry," he said, addressing the room. "This experience doesn't reflect the value Southern Table was built on. I promise we'll do better, not just here but across every location, because every single one of you deserves better." There was a quiet murmur of approval from the customers, and Jared could feel the tension beginning to lift, but he wasn't done yet. Turning back to Tyler, Jared paused for a moment before speaking. "You're young," he said, "and we all make mistakes. But what you said about me earlier wasn't just disrespectful, it was prejudiced. If I didn't look like the kind of person you expected to tip, that's a bias you need to confront, not just for this job, but for your future." Tyler's head dropped, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean it." "I believe you," Jared replied. "But intentions aren't enough. Growth comes from taking responsibility and doing better next time. I hope you'll use this as an opportunity to reflect and improve." Jared turned back to the manager. "One last time, I'm giving you 30 days to turn this around," he said. "Retrain the staff, address the culture, and make sure every customer leaves feeling valued. I'll be back unannounced, and I'll expect to see real change." "Understood." The manager nodded, quickly understood. "Mr. Cole." Jared gave a small, satisfied nod and grabbed his coat from the back of his chair as he walked toward the door. The customers began to applaud, not out of spectacle, but out of appreciation for someone who genuinely cared about accountability. Once outside, Jared let out a deep breath, the cool Memphis air grounding him. It wasn't the afternoon he had anticipated, but it was one that had reminded him why he started this journey in the first place. Leadership wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence, about making things right when they went wrong. As he walked back to his car, he reflected on the lesson he just experienced firsthand. Sometimes even the people with the best intentions need to be reminded of their own values, and sometimes the most powerful change comes from moments of discomfort and honesty. Moments like these are a reminder that no matter how successful you become, staying connected to your purpose is what truly matters. Treat people with kindness, hold yourself accountable, and always strive to leave things better than you found them. And if you're in a leadership position, remember, it's not just about what you build, it's about how you inspire others to grow with you. What do you think about Jared's approach? Would you have handled it differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories like this one.